Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, former President Trump's sentencing in his hush money case is delayed until after the election. How that could affect the presidential race.
The United States adds a modest number of jobs in August, but the unemployment rate falls, painting a mixed picture of the overall economy.
The issue that we've been grappling with for a little bit now is the job market is cooling, but it was started from a level that was probably too hot.
And with many schools in ruins, teachers in Gaza struggle to educate children in tents and makeshift classrooms.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation. The Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The 2024 presidential campaign is entering the final weekend before the critical first debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris.
While the vice president huddles with her team for debate prep, the Republican nominee was in federal court, fighting to overturn a guilty verdict, while another case saw a big delay. John Yang begins our coverage.
The former president began his day with a familiar legal battle.
No one is above the law.
In New York City, Trump and his lawyers asked a federal appeals court to overturn a $5 million verdict that found him liable for sexual abuse and defamation of the columnist E. Jean Carroll. She accused him of raping her nearly 3 decades ago. Today, Trump lashed out against the accusations and once again claimed, without evidence, that the lawsuit was politically motivated.
I'm running for president, and I have all these cases all of a sudden come out. And they're fake cases, and they report back to DOJ.
In another courtroom, a legal win in another case. For now, a Manhattan judge delayed Trump's sentencing in his hush money case until after the November election. It had been scheduled for later this month. By afternoon, Trump was back in a battleground state, North Carolina, making his case to the Fraternal Order of Police.
With your help, we will restore public safety to our streets. We will bring back law and order to our nation.
His Democratic opponent, Vice President Kamala Harris, spent her day in Pittsburgh, out of the public eye, but gearing up for next week's presidential debate. Today, the Harris-Walz campaign announced that in August it had raised a staggering $361 million. That's nearly triple what Trump took from donors in the same month, $130 million. Harris begins the home stretch to Election Day with $404 million on hand to spend.
No office in
Days after announcing her support for Harris, former Representative Liz Cheney said Harris had the vote of another prominent Republican, her dad.
Do you care to share with us who he might be voting for?
Dick Cheney will be voting for Kamala Harris.
As the campaign enters the final 2-month sprint, voting can officially begin as the first absentee ballots hit mailboxes in North Carolina today. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang.
And we start the day's other headlines inside a Georgia courtroom. The teenager charged in Wednesday's shooting at Appalachia High School that killed 4 people made his first court appearance today, and so did his father. The two were arraigned separately in back-to-back hearings, while families of the victims were seated in the front row. The suspect's father, Colin Gray, faces charges of involuntary manslaughter and second-degree murder for providing a firearm to his son while knowing he was a threat to himself and others. The 14-year-old suspect will be tried as an adult. Both will remain in custody after their lawyers decided not to seek bail. Southern California is sweltering in the peak of a late summer heat wave today, with some places expected to soar above 110 degrees. Excessive heat warnings are in effect until Monday, with triple-digit temperatures on deck all weekend. That fits with a global pattern of hot weather, with data out today showing it's been the hottest summer ever recorded worldwide. The European Climate Service, Copernicus, says that puts 2024 on track to be the warmest year observed in human history. Scientists mostly attribute the heat to human-caused climate change. The White House is calling on Israel to investigate the death of an American citizen in the occupied West Bank today. Witnesses say the 26-year-old woman was shot by Israeli troops during an anti-settlement protest. Doctors say she was struck in the head and later died in a hospital. In a statement, the IDF wrote that its forces, quote, responded with fire toward a main instigator of violent activity who hurled rocks, and that it's looking into reports that a foreign national was killed. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said U.S. officials are gathering more information on what happened.
We deplore this tragic loss. I have no higher priority than the safety and protection of American citizens around the world, wherever they are. Something I take with the utmost seriousness. So, as we have more info, we'll share it, we'll make it available, and as necessary, we'll act on it.
That comes as Israel appears to have withdrawn from several West Bank refugee camps after a military operation that lasted more than a week and left dozens dead. Residents of the Jenin camp described the destruction as the worst they've ever seen. Israel says it was targeting militants to curb attacks against its civilians. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says the U.S. will provide $250 million in additional weapons to Ukraine. Austin made the announcement in Germany today, and President Volodymyr Zelensky once again pushed for permission to use long-range weapons to strike targets deeper inside Russia. U.S. officials fear such attacks could escalate the war. Speaking to reporters today, Secretary Austin defended the administration's position.
We said all along, Uta, there's no one capability that will, in and of itself, be decisive in this campaign. Each time we point out that it's not just one thing, it's the combination of capabilities and how you integrate those capabilities to achieve objectives.
The meeting comes after a series of Russian airstrikes this week, including today's missile attack on the city of Pavlograd in the eastern part of the country. Regional officials there say at least 50 people were injured. The Chinese government says it will no longer allow international adoptions of its children, except in the case of blood relatives adopting a child or stepchild. A Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson gave few details except to say the decision is in line with the spirit of relevant international conventions. More than 160,000 Chinese children have been adopted by overseas families since 1992. About half of those were by Americans. The U.S. State Department says it's seeking clarification on how the decision will affect hundreds of American families with pending applications. And on Wall Street, stocks tumbled after the latest jobs report sparked new worries about the U.S. economy. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped more than 400 points, or about 1%. The Nasdaq fell more than 400 points and is now more than 10% off its record highs. The S&P 500 closed out its worst week since March of 2023. And it's the sprint to the finish for the Paralympic Games in Paris. The closing ceremony is on Sunday. Today saw some impressive performances. British cycling star Sarah Storey added a 19th gold medal to her, gotta say it, storied career. The 46-year-old actually won her first Paralympic gold as a swimmer at the Barcelona Games back in 1992. China set a new world record in the qualifying heat in the 4x100-meter universal relay. They went on to win gold in the event, which features 2 men and 2 women, each with different disabilities. And Team USA's Hunter Woodall took home gold in the men's 400-meter. His wife, Tara Davis Woodhall, herself a gold medalist in the Paris Games, was there to cheer him on. And a passing of note. Celebrated Brazilian musician Sergio Mendes has died. The Grammy-winning pianist, songwriter, and arranger was one of the country's biggest stars, bringing bossa nova to a global audience. His biggest hit was a cover of the song Mas Que Nada with his group Brasil 66. Mendes was still performing in 2023, but spent months dealing with the effects of long COVID before his death. Sergio Mendes was 83 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, David Brooks and Kimberly Atkins Stohr weigh in on the week's political headlines. The U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan on global efforts to aid millions of people displaced by the country's civil war. And several deaths at the start of the school football season raise more questions about the sport's risks.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
The latest jobs report shows the labor market is definitely cooling off. The U.S. added 142,000 new jobs last month, and the unemployment rate dipped slightly to 4.2%. Overall, the report was better than July, but with revisions and other data coming out this week, it shows a job market that is notably cooler than this past winter. All of this is being closely watched as the Fed prepares to cut rates later this month. Austin Goolsbee is the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Welcome back to the NewsHour.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what's clear from the data is that the job market is slowing down. What's your overall read of this report and what it says about the strength of the U.S. economy?
The issue that we've been grappling with for a little bit now is the job market is cooling, but it was started from a level that was probably too hot. So what we need is to get it stabilized at a steady state, full employment kind of a level. And there's a couple of warning signs here that as the job markets keep cooling, and if we get more months that are below what we expected, like this month, or they revised what were already disappointing months in the previous 2 months downward, the more we see that, the more nervous we might want to be on what's happening on the state of the economy.
So how aggressive should the Fed be when it comes to cutting rates at this meeting that's scheduled for later this month?
You know the rules. I'm not allowed to speak for anybody else on the committee, only for myself. I think we set a high interest rate more than a year ago, and we've been sitting there with this high rate this whole time. And the conditions more than a year ago when we set it were very different than they are today. The inflation rate is something like half what it was back then, and we set it that high to try to get rid of inflation, and the job market has cooled significantly. My expectation is what's appropriate is multiple rate cuts over the next several meetings, that if you look out over the year, you only want to be this tight as a central bank if you're afraid that the economy is overheating, and this isn't what overheating looks like. If anything, it's overcooling.
There are some economists, some of whom we've spoken to on this program, who say that the Fed is behind the curve, that rate cuts at this point won't help the economy in time, and that any rate cuts need to be significantly larger. Where are you on that?
I think the hardest thing for a central bank ever is to figure out exactly the timing. So what we're trying to determine is, are we behind the curve? Are we on the curve? What is to come? It's not just a backward-looking thing. And we don't chat GPT style say, well, if the job market number is X, then that means Y at the next meeting. But I think we've got to take seriously the idea that if you look at the long arc of the data, it's pretty clear what's happened. Inflation's come way down, the job market has cooled, and if we do not start moving apace at getting the rates back to something like normal, we're going to increasingly have problems on the real side of the economy.
Well, a question about one aspect of that long arc of the data, to use your phrase. If you look at the job revisions downward, over the last 3 months, we've been creating an average of about 115,000 jobs a month. And that's down quite a bit from last winter. Are you confident that we're not sliding too much and heading into a possible recession?
That's the fear. I don't express confidence about predictions. The job of central banker is to worry about everything. But that's the primary worry, is that with the slowing of the job creation and the rise of the unemployment rate, that it won't stabilize at something like where it is now. If everything stopped and the unemployment rate was 4.2% and we had 150,000 jobs a month and that just continued, that would be fine. That would be kind of a steady state, full employment type rate that people have expected. The great fear is that it just keeps cooling and it gets worse. And that's what we got to try to guard against.
I want to also ask you about the commercial real estate sector, because there are questions about whether the problems in that sector might spread. There's some analysts who believe that office buildings are never going to recover to their pre-pandemic levels, and that you'll have banks and investors eating the losses, hundreds of billions of dollars potentially. How do you see that?
Look, the office sector has been troubled. There's no question. You go to the downtowns of a lot of big cities, and the vacancy rates are higher than what they were pre-pandemic for sure. Part of that's got to be sorted out. How much are people going to work from home, work from hybrid? What are going to be the demands for space? The important thing over 23, after Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, there was a fear that the office real estate issue was going to come to a head and be a real credit crunch on the banking sector. That largely didn't happen. I think it's a safety and soundness supervision is a core function of the Fed, and the bank examiners are on top of these issues, and that's not separate from what happens to the rates. If the rates are coming down, it makes it easier to refinance buildings, to incur whatever losses have to be incurred and to get on with it. So we'll just have to see how those play out in the context of the rates.
Austan Goolsbee is president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, it's back to school season, and last night we brought you a report on Israeli children displaced from their homes and schools by the war and violence. But in Gaza, 625,000 children have no school to return to at all. Most of Gaza's 560 schools have been damaged or destroyed. More than half have been directly hit by Israeli forces, who say schools have been used as shelter by Hamas militants. As Nick Schifrin reports with producer Shams Odeh, in Gaza, the few remaining schools are now shelters for the displaced.
In Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, the classroom is a tent. And the students, displaced children of war. Proud to contribute, eager to learn in a class rather than from the conflict they've been forced to endure.
We're trying to provide relief for children through education and play so they feel better mentally.
Taha Ibrahim is an elementary school teacher, himself displaced, and a volunteer with a French-sponsored program for kids.
As educators, we're trying to help students remember what they have learned and at the same time try and cheer them up and relieve them from the pressure they're under despite ongoing bombing and displacement.
In a neighboring tent, 8-year-old triplets Lana Batul and Lin Abu Aseh with their younger sister Bisan have a message for the kids around the world starting school this week.
We're supposed to go to school. Everyone is going back to school except us in Gaza. You're so lucky.
They've lost their home and been displaced multiple times, but have held on to their dreams.
I wanted to be a doctor because I want to help people who aren't feeling well.
When I grow up, I want to be a teacher so I can teach kids and they can learn.
And so the triplets leave their canvas home in the Al Zawaida camp, which has been their refuge for months, and cross just a few steps over the sand to arrive at their canvas school. Tent classrooms like these are all that Gaza's children have. In a war where the UN says more than 9,500 children enrolled in schools have been killed, Gazans say the entire educational infrastructure has been eviscerated. The UN says at least 85% of Gaza's schools have been directly hit or damaged. And in this war, and in every war in Gaza, UN schools transformed to shelters for nearly 2 million displaced, like the Abu Hamisa school in Al-Barej camp. Classrooms once filled with students, now home to families with nowhere else to go. Clothes rather than chalk, dishes rather than drawings, a kitchen and a bedroom all piled up in a corner.
When we used to go to school, they would teach us that school is our second home, but now it is in fact our only home.
Onana Abu Al-Khair was studying to be a dentist at one of Gaza's top schools, Al-Azhar University, seen here before the war and today. The UN says all of Gaza's 12 universities have been damaged or destroyed. Israel blames Hamas for living in and fighting from residential buildings and using schools turned shelters as cover. Despite it all, Onana Abu Al-Khair tries not to forget what she's learned or what she's lost.
Gaza was beautiful, with its people, busy streets, and food. We want to go back to that because we cannot get used to the situation we're in right now. We are not resilient. We are forced and obliged to live this way.
Her mother, Suhair.
It's as if we're dying slowly while still alive. We want these young kids and students whose life was taken away from them to be able to live again, so they can get up, get dressed, wear their uniforms, eat breakfast, and go to school, see their teachers and their friends, study and excel.
But those are dreams deferred. UNICEF estimates all of Gaza's children, 1 million people, need mental health and psychosocial support. They have seen too much and had to grow up too fast. Miriam Al-Nabahin is 4.
Our home was bombed and there were injured people everywhere. There were rocks, little tiny rocks. I wish I could go to kindergarten and for the war to end and have a new home.
But for so many, there's no going back. Back home, back to school, back to what childhood is supposed to be. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
Donald Trump is granted a political reprieve after the judge overseeing his New York criminal case delays his sentencing. That's as Kamala Harris picks up some new Republican support. On that and more, we turn tonight to the analysis of Brooks and Atkins Storr. That's New York Times columnist David Brooks and Boston Globe columnist Kimberly Atkins Storr. Jonathan Capehart is away this evening. Great to see you both.
Good to see you.
So as I just said, former President Donald Trump will not be sentenced in his New York criminal case until after Election Day. The judge in that case, Juan Merchan, explained that his decision to delay the sentencing was in part to avoid any appearance of affecting the outcome of the presidential race. Kimberly, I'll come to you on this one first because in addition to being a political analyst and an opinion writer, you're also a former trial attorney. Did Judge Merchan get this right?
I think that he did. Look, he could have gone either way. I think there are arguments in either direction just to keep the sentencing where it was or to push it off. But one thing a judge wants to do is to make sure the rulings that he makes stick. And I think the fewer, the less obfuscation or appeals or kerfuffle that can happen before the election, the better. It doesn't really do that much difference to put it off after the election. Remember, we're not talking about a likely prison sentence here. We are talking about something that's going to be below that, maybe at best probation, some fines. So I think it was the right decision just to keep it out of the political sphere entirely.
David, you could argue, though, that this does affect the election in the sense that Donald Trump's criminal convictions likely won't be at the forefront of the campaign in the final weeks to Election Day. And delay has been a feature of each of his criminal cases.
Yeah, I'd have to believe it will affect the election if I had any evidence that any of these trials has affected the polling. And I just haven't seen that during the indictment phase, even during the investigation phase when the FBI went to Mar-a-Lago in that case. And then when the conviction in New York, potentially with the sentencing, just haven't seen that much movement. People have their views of Donald Trump's morality pretty much locked down. And the people who are going to decide the election are not high engagement voters. And sometimes for those of us in this business, it's worth reminding ourselves that sometimes it could be misleading to follow the campaign day to day. Because we think, oh, things are happening. But for most voters, nothing's happening. They're not paying attention to any of it. They're looking at the fundamentals. Who's going to be better on the economy? Who's better on foreign policy? Who's better for me? And so a lot of these events, they're just come and go.
Yeah. Well, Donald Trump is drawing attention for the way that he answered a question about his child care plan yesterday. He was asked at the Economic Club of New York how he would handle child care legislation if elected president. Here is part of his nearly 2-minute long answer.
I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that because look, child care is child care. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including child care, that it's going to take care of.
Kimberly, your reaction to what you heard there?
To paraphrase the former president from his debate, I don't know what he said, and I don't think he understands what he said either. Listen, childcare is a gimme question on the campaign trail for a presidential candidate. It's something that everyone cares about. Access to affordable childcare is one of the key points to our economy, and the fact that he starts wandering off in thought about tariffs in China that have absolutely nothing to do with it shows he either has no plan or he hasn't given this any thought, or both. I also think if the Democratic Party had a family talk about the cognitive abilities of Joe Biden, then it's long past time that the Republican Party confront the same thing about Donald Trump, because something's going on there.
And David, there's the way that he said what he said, but there's also the substance of what he was saying, this notion that tariffs will take care of child care costs, to use his phrasing. So we should say Donald Trump is floating a 10% across the board tariff on everything that's imported into the U.S. And economists across the political spectrum have basically said that is a tax on consumers that will raise costs across the board. What's your take on what he said and how he said it?
Yeah, I mean, this is, we can't blame this on cognitive decline, because he's been not understanding tariffs for about 10 years now. And so he thinks somehow you put a tariff on, the Chinese are going to pay for it. But as you just said, the American consumer is going to pay. And Kamala Harris has said this will raise American costs $3,600 a year for each family. And so he just doesn't understand what a tariff is, and he doesn't understand his basic fundamental policy. There have been a lot of bad policy ideas thrown around, as there always are in a general election campaign. I'm not a fan of some of the way Kamala Harris wants to tax unrealized capital gains, which strikes me as economic mystery. But the single worst policy idea on the table before us is the Trump tariffs. That will definitely raise costs, raise inflation, really be a tremendous setback to the economy. And he just says it because it sounds good, because he's being tough on China. So a lot of policies that are floating out there, they're not about the policy, they're about sending some sort of emotional image. And that's what Donald Trump manipulates it.
And Kimberly, back to your point about the asymmetry in this race, the double standard, where President Biden can mistakenly refer to the president of Egypt as he meant to say the president of Mexico, and that adds to this narrative that ultimately drove him from the race. Donald Trump can rant at a rally or ramble through a statement like that, and it's largely ignored. What do you see as the practical effect of that?
Well, I think as people see it more and more, especially juxtapose Kamala Harris, which, whether you like her policies or not, she is laying out policies. She is speaking in complete sentences and paragraphs about her vision for the American future. And you see Donald Trump ask a question, again, about childcare, something that impacts all of us. And he cannot seem to stay on track about that, thinking about leading a nation at a time, at this current time when we do want to keep the economy on track, when there are threats, both domestically and foreign. I think seeing this again, people sort of forgot about Trump for a while. I think seeing this again is a stark reminder that there is a clear division, a clear difference in this area.
Well, former Congresswoman Liz Cheney this week said that she's voting for Kamala Harris, that in her words, there's never been an individual in our country who is as grave a threat to our democracy as Donald Trump is. And then today, speaking at the Texas Tribune Festival, she said that her father, the former Vice President Dick Cheney, is voting for Kamala Harris, too. Take a listen.
Dick Cheney, your father, a beloved figure among Democrats for many, many years. Do you, if you know who he will be supporting or who he'll be voting for, do you care to share with us who he might be voting for?
Dick Cheney will be voting for Kamala Harris.
So Dick Cheney, stalwart conservative. No one can accuse him of being a rhino Republican in name only. He served, I think, 4 Republican presidents, if memory serves me correctly. What do you see as the significance of their dual support for Kamala Harris, David?
Who knows? Maybe he's swinging left. He's going to move to Park Slope. He's going to become a hippie.
That I'd like to see.
You know, for a lot of Republicans, character comes before policy. And I think the Cheneys are among those Republicans, and there were a lot of Bush Republicans for whom that was just an article of faith. The other interesting thing is about how interesting a decade the 2010s was, when the Republicans had a total hostile takeover from outsiders, Trump and MAGA. And so it left all the Bush people I know like, we can't support this. Not all, but 80% of the Bush people, and President Bush and Dick Cheney are among them. The Democrats had an attempted hostile takeover from Bernie Sanders, but it didn't take. And so they're a party that's still unified, and the MAGA is a party that's left behind a lot of people like Dick Cheney. And not only Dick Cheney's, but suburban Republicans who voted for Bush and Cheney.
Do you think an endorsement, or maybe it's not officially an endorsement,
right,
but do you think this show of support will make a difference?
I think that it can, as David said, in a certain segment. You know, Zillennials probably don't even know who Dick Cheney is, but if you're talking to people, disaffected Republicans who are considering either holding their nose and voting for Trump or maybe staying home, it's showing them that there is another way. If they don't like what Trump stands for and what he wants, there's a way in this election to do something different and try to eliminate him from the political arena entirely.
Does the support from the Cheneys make it harder for a George W. Bush to stay on the sidelines? Or does it make it harder for a Chris Christie, a Chris Sununu, or a Bill Barr, for that matter, to say that Kamala Harris is worse?
No. Bush doesn't. He loves it on the sidelines. Bush seems to be the happiest guy on earth in his sidelines. And I think I just emphasize something that Kimberly said, which is a lot of people are like, oh, I can't vote for these people. I can't vote for either of these people. Cheney gives a little permission structure to people. Okay, I'm not just going to sit it out. I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. I need to step up and save our republic from this. And so I think it will help with a certain segment on that point.
We've got about a minute left. Just quickly, what are you watching for in the debates next Tuesday?
I really hope that they talk about the Supreme Court. I was disappointed that we did not see that last time. But I think overall, so long as Kamala Harris it keeps her prosecutor stance and that she will be able to handle Donald Trump.
I think so, but I'm not sure. She hasn't done it, so you don't know. You know, for Donald Trump, everything's an alpha male dominance contest. And so he's going to try to do body language, screaming. He's going to try to do everything just to look bigger. He is physically a lot bigger than she is, and he's going to use that, whether it comes across as obnoxious or aggressive and manly. Well, I probably already have my opinion on that one.
All right, and we will have special coverage on Tuesday night. David Brooks and Kimberly Atkins-Storr, thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you.
Today, UN-backed human rights investigators accused both sides in the Sudanese civil war of war crimes and advocated for an independent and impartial force to protect civilians. As a series of reports that we've presented here on the NewsHour in recent weeks have shown, the area is devastated, with more than 10 million people displaced, millions hungry, and tens of thousands killed. Nick Schifrin speaks with a U.S. diplomat working to address what's become the world's largest humanitarian crisis.
Amna, the civil war erupted more than 500 days ago between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Today's call from those UN-backed investigators reflects the desperation to help civilians caught in the middle, especially after U.S.-backed peace talks in Geneva failed to end the fighting. I'm joined now by Tom Perriello, U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan. Tom Perriello, thanks very much. Welcome back to the NewsHour. As I just mentioned, the Geneva talks did not create a pathway to peace. So what's next?
Well, first of all, we were able to have a great deal of success opening up several of the humanitarian supply routes where over 1 million people are facing starvation, over 20 million are facing acute hunger, over 8 million pounds of food have moved, 3,000 tons last week into areas that have not seen emergency food distribution for 4 months. So on the issues of humanitarian access, we were able to make significant progress thanks to President Biden and Secretary Blinken giving the go-ahead to go forward with the talks. On protection of civilians, where we've seen horrific atrocities from both sides, we were able to get the first code of conduct commitment from the Rapid Support Forces. We have much more to be done on both humanitarian access and civilian protection. And ultimately, of course, the goal is a cessation of hostilities.
So how do you end this war next? Do you try the same approach that you've had already? Try and get the Sudanese armed forces, which did not show up in Geneva, and the Rapid Support Forces together again, as you have been doing for many months, if not longer than that?
We built a team of partners from the region, along with the African Union and United Nations, that were able to be working with both the RSF and the Army on really, really important life-saving steps to try to address this famine and civilian protection. That's why I think we're able to build this larger diplomatic coalition to try to push for peace.
You're describing basically taking the same steps you already have, but with all due respect, they have not worked. As we've said, the Sudanese armed forces did not show up in Geneva. You've had previous talks in Jeddah. Can you focus on some of the external actors that are fueling this conflict? Can you get the UAE to stop sending weapons to the RSF? Can you get Egypt to stop supporting the Sudanese armed forces? Can you get the actors that have been trying to put their thumbs on the scale to stop doing so?
We're pushing hard to extend the arms embargo for all of Darfur. We believe that not only needs to be extended, but we need to see greater enforcement. The United States continues to raise the costs on those individuals that are committing atrocities on both sides, as well as some of the businesses that are aiding and abetting in that effort. We're trying to build more partners coming in who can be part of doing that.
Do you have any leverage at all over external actors, who I mentioned before, many of whom are U.S. partners, when many of those capitals are hedging 2 months before the election?
Yeah, we've been very clear that we call on all the external actors to stop fueling this war, stop sending in more arms, start to be partners in the humanitarian relief, the civilian protection, and the peace efforts. We will continue to lead on those efforts.
You've described a lot of actions the U.S. has taken, but have you threatened sanctions on the leadership of the two sides? General Burhan, the head of the Sudanese Armed Forces, General Hemeti, the head of the Rapid Support Forces, as many experts have asked you to do.
Yeah, we've continued to increase the sanctions on both SAF and RSF leaders. We have, in some cases, made those explicitly related to issues, for example, atrocity prevention. We'll continue to have that be a central part of this strategy as we look to raise the costs of those that are imposing the suffering on the Sudanese people.
You mentioned the crossing, Audrey, between Chad and Darfur. The agreement to get aid across that crossing only lasts for 3 months. How are you going to extend it?
Well, we absolutely want to continue to show that this is a life-saving effort, that it is something the Sudanese people want and are appreciative of those leaders inside and outside the country that are helping to get food and medicine into these famine-stricken areas. We believe if we can continue to show those results, we'll be able to extend these efforts going forward. But we have a lot of people to reach that have not yet been reached since these reopenings.
As I said at the top of the segment, UN-backed human rights investigators called today for, quote, independent, impartial force to protect civilians. Of course, force being the operative word there. That could include boots on the ground. Is that an idea you endorse?
I think there's an understanding that, as you said before, we can't just keep doing the same things and expecting a different result. The scale of this crisis, first and foremost, is being imposed on the people of Sudan, but also increasingly on the region. And I think the recommendations coming out of the UN report are extremely important and timely as we head into the UN General Assembly, and should absolutely consider them and build support for a wide range of approaches to civilian protection and other things that can help end the war.
Let me read you a statement by the Deputy Chairman of the Sudanese Sovereign Council, Malik Agar, to my colleague Layla Milana Allen during her recent trip to Sudan. Quote, "The U.S. administration, they have never come here. We have an envoy who's never put a leg in Sudan. If you're serious to solve a problem somewhere, why don't you come and meet the president in this country? Why don't you meet us in our country? But this is not happening."
Well, I've traveled to Sudan before, and I traveled to Adre earlier, tried to come to Port Sudan, but was blocked by the government in the early parts of my tenure. More recently, we put a trip together that our diplomatic security team said would require me to just be at the airport. We communicated that. They rejected that offer, and we completely respected them rejecting that offer. But every week, I'm meeting with Sudanese people from all 18 states, hundreds and hundreds of Sudanese that I meet with virtually each week, as well as thousands from the refugee and diaspora community. So we'll continue to meet every day, every week with the Sudanese people, and hopefully that will involve a trip to Port Sudan sometime soon.
Tom Perriello, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Fans and families will pack the bleachers tonight in high school stadiums across the country as football season kicks off in earnest. But after at least 7 deaths tied to the sport since August, including 3 teenagers who sustained fatal brain injuries, questions are being raised again about the safety of the game played under those Friday night lights. William Brangham has more.
One of those deaths was a boy named Cohen Craddock, a 13-year-old from West Virginia who suffered a head injury after making a tackle in practice. His father is now advocating for the use of padded helmet coverings known as guardian caps, and he wants his son's teammates to stick with the game.
I told him that, that this is a bad accident, to move forward. I didn't want them to have the weight of my son on their shoulders, but I wanted them to play for him. I wanted them to play Cohen strong. I don't think we need to take away football. I just think we need to maybe put more safety measures out there to protect our kids.
For more on the risks and rewards of youth tackle football, we are joined by Chris Nowinski. He's the co-founder of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, a neuroscientist and a former college football player himself. Chris Nowinski, welcome to the NewsHour. We just heard from that father, Ryan Craddock, who tragically lost his son to a traumatic brain injury in football. Help us understand these numbers in perspective. Why is it that it seems that tackle football exerts such a heavy toll?
Well, I'm going to focus on the traumatic brain injuries. And I don't think, unfortunately, we can be that surprised that a few kids die every year playing football. There will be 1 billion head impacts created by the game of football this fall. So it's almost a miracle that there's only a few deaths. And that's because, helmets have actually done a good job preventing deaths, but they don't prevent every possible brain injury. The other thing to talk about is what are those billion head impacts going to do over time? And so we'll lose a couple now every year, but more will suffer long-term effects down the road.
So is it just the science indicates that repeated percussion, if it's not a traumatic event in the moment that results in these tragedies we're talking about, but that repeated percussion to the brain over time has real problems as well?
Right, and that's the area of research that I've focused on for the last 20 years, is that, having played, I took 10,000 head impacts. I survived like most people do, but I didn't realize till after I stopped playing that had laid the groundwork for the potential for me to have a disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And I think that's where we really should be focused on. These unfortunate deaths give us a window into the fact that our brains are very vulnerable. And those hits add up over time. And what we're finding is that if you have a long football career and you take hundreds or thousands of head impacts, the longer you play, the greater your odds you'll develop a degenerative brain disease that will change who you are. And, to be honest with you, I started this so long ago, but I've recently lost friends. I lost one of my teammates at Harvard to this. So it's a serious issue.
And what do you say to the many parents who say, I hear about those risks, those are isolated, perhaps, tragedies, but there is so much upside to this. There's sportsmanship, there's camaraderie, there's great exercise, the spirit that this brings to young athletes. How do you help parents weigh the benefits with these risks?
Children, unfortunately, will die in these activities. Some have died randomly from heart disorders and other things. So the deaths don't really tell us what to do. The way I advise parents on youth sports is we absolutely want our kids playing sports and team sports. They do wonderful things for their physical and neurological and mental development. But what we don't need and what we have, but we should get rid of, is our children getting hit in the head hundreds of times a year. Not every sport has that. Only a few have that. And those that do introduce a risk of concussions that can change kids and this risk of CTE. So yes to sports, but say no to the head impacts. If your kid's taken more than 100 head impacts every fall in this sport, maybe try another sport, at least till their brain has had time to develop and grow. You know, I would consider it maybe 14 to be a good guideline. No head impacts repetitively before 14. Let their brain grow, and then you can take greater risks when the kids might understand what they're getting into.
What else practically can parents do? We heard from that father, Ryan Craddock, saying that he wants kids to wear these pads on their helmets. Is there any evidence that any type of additional protection can protect the head during tackle football?
Better helmets are a little better at protecting against concussions and brain injury. There's mixed evidence on the additional pads on the outside. What I would recommend parents do before they get into equipment is have a conversation with their child's football coach about how they practice. The conversation that we're not having at any level outside of the NFL is we can change practice and get rid of probably half the head impacts, half the risk, if we just make a commitment to teaching kids how to play football successfully without them getting hit in the head every day. And the NFL has almost eliminated hitting from practice, but that's because the players fought for it. And 12-year-olds can't get together and stand up to their coach and say, hey, why are we practicing with our helmets and shoulder pads? Why don't we learn this game another way? But that is by far the number one thing that we can do to make football safer. Change practice.
All right, Chris Nowinski of the Concussion Legacy Foundation, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And we'll be back shortly, but first, take a moment to hear from your local PBS station.
It's a chance to offer your support, which helps keep programs like this one on the air.
For those of you staying with us, we take a second look now at a burgeoning fashion sector. Special correspondent Megan Thompson reports for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
It was what you might expect of a high-end, standing-room-only fashion show. Stunning clothing, booming music, and a decked-out crowd recording every minute on their phones. But what made this runway show different? All the clothing was created by indigenous designers from the U.S. and Canada. The event was put on by the Southwestern Association for Indian Arts, or SWAIA.
SWAIA Native Fashion Week is the first Indigenous Fashion Week held in the United States. We have been very invisible or very minimal in some of these industries, so we are creating a platform to highlight these voices in the world.
Yes! Over 4 days, designers, models, media, and more than 2,000 fashionistas and fans packed photo ops, pop-up shops, and more. 17 designers presented at 2 different runway shows.
The original design of North America is based on indigenous art, technique, design, culture, everything.
We're making history here! 10 years ago, Amber Dawn Barerobe produced a single runway show for SWAIA during its annual Indigenous Art Market. She says interest has grown so much she had to create this much larger event. But Bear Robe, a native art historian, says what's happening here isn't necessarily new. For thousands of years, indigenous people have been creating couture, fashion speak for clothing that is custom made.
You do not get more couture than hunting an animal, gutting and cleaning intestines to make this pristine, beautiful, exquisite material to make a one-of-a-kind gut-skin garment.
Some designers put a modern spin on traditional materials like beads and feathers. Canadian Helen Oro is Plains Cree from the Pelican Lake First Nation.
One of the questions when I first started was, do you have to be Indigenous to wear beadwork? It's for everyone.
Did you feel the weight of that?
For creators who don't have brick-and-mortar stores, the event gave them a chance to sell directly to customers.
Thank you so much.
Orlando Dugai designs luxury women's and menswear, all handmade in his Santa Fe studio.
The beading, I do all of that myself.
His work is inspired by the stars, which hold important spiritual and cultural meaning for the Navajo.
How the stars show up in my work is through a lot of beading and embroidery, lots of sparkles, and I chose evening wear because it's usually worn at night under the stars.
Dugai's new collection, which he's planning to launch next year, is called Stargazer.
It's a crew in a ship traveling the galaxy. I want to represent my culture, my heritage, but without being very literal in translation. One of the challenges is my work not being native enough for non-native people and also native people.
There are expectations of what a native designer should be, and I've run away from that concept my whole life. Beautiful.
Taos Pueblo designer Patricia Michaels has been in the business for 40 years, and she says she's always dealt with ignorance and stereotypes, including in 2013 when she was the first Native American on the long-running, hugely popular TV show Project Runway, where she made it all the way to the final.
Being from Taos Pueblo, living matter is important to us. So many of the imagery that I have on my hand-painted silks and different fabrications of my textiles are ideas that come from nature.
Amazing.
Michaels recently made a dress for actor Tantoo Cardinal, who starred in the Oscar-nominated Killers of the Flower Moon, to wear to the Cannes Film Festival.
I thought of an eagle headdress, and that's the biggest honor. So I took it from the man's head, and I flipped it, and I put it at her core, and I wanted her to feel like she was in flight.
I remember when it was shameful to be wearing anything Indian. And now to see what's happened with our industry, oh my God.
But excitement and interest can lead to cultural appropriation when non-native designers profit from native patterns and motifs without permission or acknowledgement. Ralph Lauren came under fire in 2022 for using indigenous Mexican designs.
And we're working on getting native people into every department from like...
Filmmaker and model Pishon Bread has been working with Ralph Lauren to increase inclusivity. Last year, the brand announced its first artist in residence, Navajo weaver Naomi Glasses, who's created 2 collections so far. Bread, who is Comanche, Kiowa, and Cherokee, hopes fashion events like this will continue the progress.
I really hope that this opens the fashion world's eyes into our world and successfully creates a bridge where we can collaborate with different brands or anything that we dream of as designers.
This is Bread's first runway show as a designer. Their collection is an ode to the 1970s, when federal law finally guaranteed Native Americans the right to religious freedom.
It was such a politically charged time for Indigenous people, for Native people around the country. So I wanted to imagine, what if we weren't always fighting? What if we could have some joy? What would we wear to the disco?
When Saturday's runway show began, Breads were the first looks to come down the runway. 7 more designers followed. For many of the spectators, the show was about more than beautiful clothes.
It became very emotional.
I'm speechless.
This is history in the making.
Patricia Michaels' designs ended the evening. Her signature hand-dyed and painted garments receiving a standing ovation from a devoted crowd.
I see how it's evolved so that every Native tribe now can have their story told in a very modern, contemporary sense without ridicule, but celebration.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Megan Thompson in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
And remember, there's much more online. You can check out our YouTube page for PBS News Weekly that looks this week at the latest in Russia's war on Ukraine and its efforts to influence the U.S. presidential election.
And later tonight, be sure to tune into Washington Week with The Atlantic. With less than 2 weeks, or rather 2 months to November's election, our own William Brangham guest moderates a panel discussion on the state of the presidential race.
And tomorrow on PBS News Weekend, a new court ruling rolls back protections for communities of color in a part of Louisiana known as Cancer Alley. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us, and have a great weekend.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world. At hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.